So, what if you could use data science and, get this, behavioral economics to solve one of a country's biggest problems, finding love? Well, in Japan, a really tough demographic situation has turned matchmaking into a national priority, and the data on what works and what doesn't is absolutely mind-blowing.
All right, let's dive into the 2024 Marriage White Paper, which is what this is all based on. First, we'll look at Japan's marriage problem. Then we'll dig into the data on who actually succeeds. After that, we'll tackle the surprising truth about age and income. We'll also explore the psychology that holds people back. And finally, we'll see how this plays out in a story of two different Japans.
Okay, so first things first. To really get what's going on with all this high-tech matchmaking, you have to understand the stakes. Why is marriage such a huge deal in Japan right now?
Well, this chart gets right to the heart of it. In Japan, a tiny 2.3% of births happen outside of marriage. Now look at the US or France. It's a completely different world. You can immediately see why marriage and birth rates are just completely tied together in Japan.
So the national logic becomes incredibly simple and direct. If you want to fix a demographic crisis caused by one of the lowest birth rates on the planet, you have to fix the marriage rate first. One directly leads to the other.
But here is the central puzzle. It is not for a lack of trying or wanting. A massive 80% of unmarried young people say they do want to get married eventually. So if the desire is there, but the marriage rate keeps falling, what's getting in the way? All right, now let's get to the fun part. The data. The report dug into thousands of matchmaking service users to figure out what separates the people who walk away with a partner from those who, well, just walk away. So the report puts everyone into two main camps. You've got the Seikan Sha. Those are the success stories. And then you have the Taikai Sha, the people who quit. Figuring out what the successful group does differently, that's the key to this whole thing.
Now this table's super interesting. Yeah, you can see the successful people are a little younger, and they actually spend less time on the service, because, they find someone faster. But that's not the real story here. The real kicker is in those last two rows, meetings and applications.
It really just boils down to this: being proactive. Successful men go on 4 times more meetings, or omiai as they're called, than the guys who quit. For women, it's 2.5 times more. It turns out the single biggest predictor of success isn't your looks or how much you make. It's just putting yourself out there and creating more opportunities.
Okay, now we're going to get into one of the most counterintuitive parts of this whole report. This is where the data really pushes back hard on what a lot of people might think about the roles of age and money in the dating game.
For women, the data shows a pattern that, while pretty harsh, is kind of widely understood. The chances of success are highest if you're under 35, and then they drop off pretty significantly. So, no huge surprises there. But what about for men? The common wisdom is that a big paycheck can basically make your age irrelevant. Well, the data says not so fast. So get this. Even when you look at men in the exact same high-income bracket, we're talking around $60,000 here, the difference is huge. A man in his early 40s is 12 percentage points less likely to find a partner than a guy in his early 30s. So yeah, money helps, but it definitely doesn't stop the clock. And the big takeaway here is that the rules of the game are changing. For men too, starting your search earlier gives you a massive advantage. And it's an advantage that a bigger salary later in life just can't always buy back. So this raises a huge question, right? If people say they want to get married, and they know that being younger and more active helps, why do so many people wait? Well, the report has a fascinating answer that comes from the world of behavioral economics. It all starts with something called cognitive bias. The easiest way to think about this is like glitches in your brain's software. They're these mental shortcuts that our brains take that, unfortunately, stop us from making rational choices, especially about long-term stuff like finding a partner.
So the report, referencing Professor Wataru Suzuki, points to a few of these specific biases. You've got present bias, which is basically choosing to have fun tonight instead of scrolling through profiles for your future. There's status quo bias, where, staying single just feels easier than the effort of dating. And there's overconfidence bias, where people just don't realize how much their own dating prospects change as they get older.
So how do you fix these mental glitches? Well, use a concept from the Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler called a nudge. It's basically a little gentle push that's designed to help you make a better choice for your future self. Back in the day, that nudge came from your family, or your coworkers, or your community. But today, a lot of those old social pressures are gone. So matchmaking services are stepping in to become essentially professional nudgers. They use data and counselors to push people toward the goal that they themselves already say they want. And finally, the data points to one last crucial factor:
geography. Because it turns out, where you live in Japan dramatically changes your odds of finding a partner. It's really a tale of two very different countries.
I mean, just look at this geographic divide. For men in big cities, the success rate is around 40%, but that number absolutely plummets in rural areas. And the reason for this huge gap, it isn't just about dating, it's about economics.
It's a story about demographics, really. For decades, young women have been leaving rural areas and moving to big cities to find better jobs and build careers. And this creates a very simple but very powerful imbalance. You end up with a surplus of single women in the cities and a surplus of single men left behind in the countryside.
And this brings us to a really fundamental point. A researcher named Kanako Amano argues that trying to boost marriage rates in rural areas is basically a pie-in-the-sky idea, unless you fix the real reason women are leaving in the first place, the search for better, more equal career opportunities.
So all of this leaves us with a fascinating final thought. As we start to analyze every single part of finding a partner, from demographics to our own cognitive biases, it raises a huge question about the future of relationships, not just in Japan, but everywhere. In a world that's run on algorithms and analytics, is a data-driven nudge the new Cupid?